I grew up in a small town in Maine, nestled between thick forests and winding roads. It wasn't the kind of place where anything strange happened, at least not on the surface. Life was simple. Everyone knew everyone, and if something unusual did occur, it was either quickly forgotten or written off as an accident. But all that changed one night when I had an encounter that I can never fully explain. I was 24 at the time, just beginning to figure things out. My life had been a series of half plans and endless waiting for something bigger, something more meaningful. My best friend Mike had always been there for me, even though we'd grown apart a little after high school. We reconnected a few months earlier, and things felt almost like they used to. Easy, uncomplicated. He had been living a few hours away, but that weekend he decided to make the drive back into town to catch up. We went to a local bar that night, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and the drinks are poured a little heavier than they should be. Mike and I spent hours reminiscing, laughing at old stories, and wondering where time had gone. By the end of the night, it was well past midnight, and I was ready to head home. Mike offered to give me a ride, but I told him I was fine. I always felt more comfortable driving on my own, even at night. The drive from the bar to my house was a straightforward route, just a few miles of rural highway surrounded by dense woods. But on that particular night, something felt off. The air seemed unusually heavy, and the road ahead appeared darker than usual. There wasn't a single car in sight, and the only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional rustle of trees. About halfway home, I noticed something in the distance, a figure standing at the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a shadow cast by a tree or some trick of the night, but as I drew closer, I could see it more clearly. A woman, standing still, facing away from me, her back turned toward the road. She was dressed in an old-fashioned white dress, almost like something from a different era. I slowed the car down, unsure of what to do. It wasn't the kind of thing you expect to see on a quiet highway in the middle of nowhere. There weren't any houses nearby, and the nearest town was miles away. I rolled down the window, hoping she might hear me and turn around. "Are you okay?" I called out. She didn't respond. She didn't even move. Something about it felt wrong. I could feel my heart rate pick up, but I told myself it was just some lonely traveler needing help. Maybe her car broke down, or she was lost. I took a deep breath, getting ready to pull over, but just before I could, I saw her head jerk to the side, as if she was listening for something. Her hair, long and dark, whipped around her face, and in that instant, I realized she wasn't standing still. She was swaying, side to side, like she was, dancing. But it wasn't a graceful dance. It was jerky, unnatural, like someone trying to force their body to move against its will. I froze, my foot still on the brake. My instincts told me to drive, to get away from whatever this was, but my body refused to move. I didn't know what was worse, seeing her like that or the growing feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then, without warning, she turned around. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes were wide open, but they weren't normal eyes. They were entirely black, no whites, just a deep, endless void. My breath caught in my throat as her gaze locked onto mine. It felt like she could see right through me, into the very core of who I was. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I couldn't even blink. She started walking toward me, slow at first, then faster, with a sudden burst of unnatural speed. My mind screamed at me to drive, to escape, but my hands were frozen on the wheel. When she was just a few feet from my car, I snapped out of it. I slammed my foot on the gas, swerving around her and speeding down the road without looking back. My hands were shaking, my heart racing in my chest. I didn't stop until I was safely home. I locked all the doors and didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was just a bad dream, a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something real had happened, something unnatural. Days passed and life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be. But I couldn't stop thinking about that woman, her black eyes, and the eerie way she moved. I kept hearing things, whispers in the night, footsteps in the hallways, as if she was always there, watching, waiting. It wasn't until a week later that I decided to go back to the spot where I'd seen her. I had to know if there was any logical explanation. Maybe someone had been stranded, or it was just a weird coincidence. So I drove out to the same stretch of highway, hoping to find something, anything that could explain what I'd experienced. But when I got there, the place looked completely different. The area where I had seen her was empty, no sign of anything unusual. It was just a stretch of dark highway surrounded by trees. I drove up and down the road for hours, but I never saw anyone. There were no signs of any disturbance, no signs of anyone having been there. I was about to give up and head home when I noticed something strange in the distance. There, at the edge of the woods, stood a small, dilapidated house. It had never been there before. In fact, I'd lived in this town my whole life, and I knew this area like the back of my hand. There was no house there. I drove closer, my curiosity getting the best of me. The closer I got, the more I could make out the details of the house. It was falling apart, the windows broken and boarded up, the door hanging crooked on its hinges. I couldn't understand why I hadn't seen it earlier, or why I was only noticing it now. I parked my car, my mind racing. I had to check it out. I approached the house cautiously, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread settle over me. The air was thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. When I reached the front porch, I stopped. I didn't want to go inside. Something told me I wasn't supposed to be there, but something else told me I had no choice. I pushed open the door, which creaked loudly, and stepped inside. The smell of decay and mold hit me instantly. The place was old, completely abandoned. But as I explored, I began to hear the faintest sound, something like whispers coming from upstairs. I froze, my blood running cold. I didn't want to go up there. I didn't want to find out what was making that sound. But I had no choice. I climbed the stairs slowly, the whispers growing louder with every step. When I reached the top, I saw something that made my heart stop. In the corner of the room, curled up in a ball, was the woman from the road. Her black eyes stared back at me, and her lips began to move. "Leave," she whispered, her voice so soft I could barely hear it. "Before it's too late." I ran. I didn't look back. As I made my way back to my car, I realized something. That house, that woman, none of it made any sense. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just a random encounter. Whatever I had seen, whatever I had felt, was real, and it was still out there.